Hello everyone and welcome back to yet another week and edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in yet again. We should have another great week ahead of us of all things fantasy football. But today, before we get into tonight's events, we are looking ahead to tonight's games. Two, in fact, not one but two Monday Night Football games to talk about tonight in terms of betting odds, money line, spreads, what have you, then looking at the prop bets for tonight. Also recapping the events of this weekend in both the NFL and college football, going over some of my fantasy stars of the week. We conclude with a little bit of a stardom sit-em for tonight's games because there are two of them. You might have to decide between some guys in that regard. But before we get into anything to do with our show today, I do want to remind you that if you do feel so inclined, please consider leaving a tip, donation, question, comment, or concern in the comments section. You guys have been doing a great job with that. But also like, follow, and subscribe to the show if you do feel so inclined in terms of leaving tips, donations, questions, comments, or concerns. You can make yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. Without further ado, let's jump right into today's show. Start off with a general betting preview for not one, but two Monday Night Football games ahead of us tonight. That is the Jags, Bills, and the Commanders, Bengals. Two very intriguing matchups. Not the best of matchups, so to speak, but it is what we have for tonight. So let's just go over the first game of the night. Jags, Bills, 7:15, I believe, is the kickoff. The spread, Buffalo's favored by 5. The over-under, 45.5. The money lines, Buffalo minus 240. Jacksonville, I believe, plus 200. So, as you can see, Buffalo a very heavy favorite, as they seem to deserve to be. I do not think that this game is going to be as even as a lot of people might expect. If there's one thing that I think the Jags can take kind of credit for, is that they've built a very timely defense that's not necessarily at fault for where they are. I think that the main problems that the Jaguars face is the connection with the offense. There's a lot of talent there, and Trevor Lawrence still has time to become what they want him to be, but it's quickly running out. And as we see in terms of how these young quarterbacks get viewed in terms of the market and how much teams are willing to invest on them, he needs to return on that investment a little bit. And so far, it hasn't borne fruit for this Jaguars offense. Like I said, the pieces are there. It is not connected. On the Bills side of things, we talk about how this offense looks under Joe Brady and how he's kind of limited the damage that Josh Allen has done in terms of being this generational quarterback but having turnovers hold him back in certain situations. What we've built is a system in which he's comfortable distributing the ball. It's not like it's so Allen-centric that he's liable to turn the ball over, but it does keep him on schedule, gives a nice tempo to this offense, and it allows for guys like James Cook and Dalton Kincaid to be huge X factors there as well. So just looking at the general betting lines for this game, I would have to say Buffalo will comfortably cover. That being said, the Jags defense, if it weren't for the ineptitudes of their offense, would be talked about more for their ability to shut down opposing offenses. Let's look at the past couple of weeks here. Yes, they played the Dolphins. That was very impressive. And then they played the Browns, where, that game was just inept all around in every single regard. But in both those games, they held these units to very few big plays. They could very well be 2-0 at this point had their offense scored more points. Had Travis Etienne not had the ball punched out. Had they not been backed up so many times against Cleveland. Perhaps we're looking at a different game here where the hype surrounding it would be much higher. When we look at Buffalo, they've really looked like one of the most impressive teams in the entire NFL with how they played. Yes, they had a little bit of a scare against Arizona, but they came out and they really played a very, very dominant game against the Miami Dolphins in terms of limiting their playmakers, showing the lack of depth that Miami had in that game. As Shots Below the Belt said, yo, I dropped Dalton Kincaid. He did my team dirty. Don't need that negativity in my fantasy football locker room. Well, I still have him on my team because I have big hopes for this young man. And I think tonight he will have a big game. That being said, it's your decision, my man. But I think for now, it might come back to bite you in some regards there, because I still think that Dalton Kincaid is a very valuable asset to this Bills offense. They may not throw the ball as much, but when they do, look for him to be the number one target in that system outside of a guy like Khalil Shakir, who's proving himself, as we'll later see on the show, that he himself is going to be a true slot receiver who can get you valuable fantasy points. But that's just your decision, my man. I hope it doesn't come back to bite you in the future. But it's an interesting one at that. But looking at the rest of this game, I think that it will come down to whether or not the Jaguars can limit what the Bills want to do best, and that is control the football. Shots Below the Belt says, haha, nice. I think that this game will definitely come down to the Jags defense limiting how much time and control the Bills have over the football. Because if they do that, then the best weapons on the Bills' offense most likely won't be effective. For example, as Andre enters the chat, say that we know that Cook is going to get X amount of touches and Josh Allen's going to have, say, X amount of throws. If the game script for Buffalo is to control the game early, the Jags defense has to be ready from the jump to be really tied into stopping the run. Because what they do, as Andre says, Montgomery has been insane so far, 15 plus points each week. And I believe he's talking about David Montgomery. Yes, I really like David Montgomery in this Lions offense. Going up against Seattle this week, I hope he doesn't gash us because our run defense has been pretty atrocious so far. Probably the worst part of our defense, but I digress. Montgomery, really impressive in that Lions offense. And it just goes to show that Ben Johnson just has so much variety in the way he can call plays with so many weapons they have in this offense. And I think that's a scary part of how Detroit has started the season. Jared Goff has not looked very good. They might have just lost Laporta for an extended period of time. Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's timely, but he's not getting the yardage that he had last night. As Andre says, do you think Josh Allen's going to have to run tonight? That's a very good question. I think that more often than not, they're going to try to limit the amount of times he runs, but it could be a huge X factor in how the Bills kind of plan for the Jags defense. Because the Jags defense, very good sideline defense, very shocking in coverage situation. The Jaguars secondary, very underrated in what they did against Miami in week 1. So I think Josh Allen will make the timely decisions to run, but he's not going to have to, escape out of structure, if that's kind of what you're getting at here. I think he's going to run in terms of seeing how he can help his team, and in that sense of the word, that's the way that I think the Bills will want him to run. If there's literally nothing else he can do, then that's, because he's saying, I'm just wondering because of his hand injury, he didn't at all last week. I think the Bills are aware of that, and they're going to want to protect their quarterback in whatever way they can, so that A, he doesn't turn the ball over, and B, that hand injury doesn't get re-aggravated. So it's a very good point. I think at the end of the day, they can trust James Cook a lot. He's been very good as well through these past couple of weeks. And I think in the pass game, it's not going to be anything fancy. It's not going to be deep shots down the field. It's just going to be timely, short to intermediate routes that keeps the rhythm of the offense going. But a fantastic question from Andre, as usual. But let's shift our attention a little bit, because we don't want this game to get lost in the luster, no matter that it's the kind of undercard game in that sense of the word. Commanders-Bengals. This game is a very weird game. Very weird interconference game, just because these two teams could not feel any more different right now. Because the Commanders, no one really knows what they are. They're largely unknown commodity outside of, Jaden Daniels, a decent Russian quarterback. I kind of like Brian Robinson Jr., Terry McLaurin's underrated, but it's not like a team that you feel is either well-rounded enough that you can appreciate and watch, or a team that's bad enough that you know their limitations. They're kind of there. Whereas the Bengals, we now know kind of where they are. They're a team that can still play with the best of them in the AFC. They still have the whole contract situation kind of hanging over their heads between Chase and Higgins. They still have the Higgins injury. But at the end of the day, I'm less concerned about them than I am the Commanders. And that's reflected kind of in the betting lines for tonight. They're 7-point favorites. The over-under is 47.5. Kind of high for this game if you want my humble opinion. And they're minus 340 in the money line. Cincinnati, that is. Washington is plus 270. And it just goes to show how random this game kind of seems. I mean, I guess if Jaden Daniels can be efficient in how he runs and protect the football, then maybe this game is closer than people expect. But I really haven't seen that much Commanders football this season to really know how and when Jaden Daniels is running and using his legs. There also isn't necessarily as much of a vertical component as I thought in this Commanders offense when Jaden Daniels was drafted to them. I thought that Jaden Daniels would definitely open up the vertical passing game, but it may have to do with the loss of Jahan Dotson in free agency, where you kind of lose one of your biggest weapons in terms of matchups, in that now it's just Terry McLaurin, and there's really no one outside of him that's going to really step up, in my opinion. Maybe Zacchaeus, but I really don't see anyone outside of just him alone that can really help in the passing game. And it will reflect as the season progresses in terms of how Jaden Daniels depresses. As Andre says, Jamar's going under in terms of yards. We will get to that. That's a perfect segue, actually, into my next segment if we have to take a quick break to talk about the prop bets for both of these games. Very bold prediction from Andre to take us into this short break, but we will be coming right back to talk about some prop bets, so you don't want to go anywhere.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on their fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Hope you enjoyed that first segment. Before we get into our second one of the day, I do want to remind you yet again to consider liking, following, and subscribing to the show and the podcast as a whole. Also, if you do feel so inclined, and you guys have been doing an excellent job of this, make yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Stickers, and Super Thanks features here on YouTube. Great way to interact with the show. Great way to get your comments, questions, concerns on air as well. And I'm really happy to see you guys wish to be involved, as I love interacting with you all. But our second segment of the day, as Andre kind of alluded to in his kind of foreboding comment about Jamar going under. I actually do not have a Jamar Chase prop bet in front of me right now to present to you guys. But I think that it could be true. I think that a lot of people underrate this Commander secondary, and a lot of people underrate the situation Jamar Chase is in. So who knows? But the ones that I do have, just ones that I was perusing through and thought would be very interesting. Some are a bit bolder than others. So without further ado, let's jump right into our prop bets for tonight's game. Let's start off with a simple one, actually. Wrong one. Yes, this is the correct graphic for this particular segment. Josh Allen over 225 plus pass yards. And at minus 135, it is kind of a bold prediction because, like I said, Josh Allen isn't expected to do much in this Bills offense outside of protecting the football and making the right reads. But I think in time he'll understand that the Jags defense is going to challenge all of his receivers, and if, as Andre kind of alluded to, he does have to escape the pocket, he is going to have opportunities to extend plays, and he's one of the best at it. And I think the screen action game will also work very well for him, chase a very underrated receiver out of the backfield. And like I said, this could be a big game for Dalton Kincaid tonight. I think that Josh Allen will be very timely in how he decides to throw the football to Kincaid. As Andre says, I can't find a Jags bet I like to pair with a Josh Allen free square. Well, this could be your Jags bet for you tonight, Andre. As I have, I might have to skip. I didn't include it actually in my graphic, but I do have Trevor Lawrence under 1.5 pass TDs. Unfortunately, I don't have a nice graphic to go with it, but under 1.5 pass TDs at minus 180. Yeah, I just feel like this is one of those games where the Bills' defense will really show its might against a really overmatched receiving core. Yes, Brian Thomas Jr. has some flashes of the brilliant wide receiver he can be for Trevor Lawrence, but right now, it's just like limiting damage control. This offense is like one game away from going completely off the rails. And I did warn a lot of you about this Jags offense and why I didn't like it. And it just seems like the speed and elusiveness isn't translating to Trevor's game. I think that they're too concerned with getting guys vertical and trying to create explosive plays out of nothing, when in fact you need various routes to really help Trevor Lawrence go through progressions, determine who's open, and things of that nature. Because right now, I just think that they're not necessarily utilizing the different traits these wide receivers have in the best way, and that could punish them. And I think that we'll see Trevor Lawrence underperform yet again tonight's game with under 1.5 passing touchdowns. So Andre, hope that helps for you. Very interesting bet. I love the Josh Allen free square for you. But the next bet, how about Keon Coleman in this game? I think a lot of people are underestimating the value he might be able to add to this Bills offense, especially when Josh Allen might be forced out of structure. Coming out of college, coming out of Florida State, well, the thing I loved about Keon Coleman is not just his big frame and how he used it to make contested catches, but his route running abilities, knowing when and where he needs to go to a certain place in the field, adjusting his route. As Bigums, a new commenter, enters the chat, traded Neighbors for Bijan in a PPR league. Thoughts? That is a very ambitious trade because I actually have not liked Bijan as a fantasy asset for the first couple of weeks, whereas Malik Neighbors actually had a fantastic game, and I'll talk about him a little bit later in the show. As Andre says, damn, you think Yoshivas has a big game tonight? Yes, I'm very high on Yoshivas. I will get to that prop in a second, but back to Bigum's point. I think that trade is a little bit ambitious, asking a lot of Bijan. I like that he's been getting more touches in this offense under Raheem Morris, but these touches really haven't translated to much. And it's kind of weird because when Tyler Algier comes into the game for Atlanta, he seems like he has a lot of space in front of him to run. Whereas Bijan, I don't know whether it's the running scheme that they've implemented or not, but it's just not as effective for him as it is for him. As Andre says, Daniel Jones loves Neighbors, force feeds him. So yeah, I think that trading Neighbors for Bijan is a little bit skeptical, especially when Malik Neighbors has a lot of potential in terms of target share and in terms of touchdowns in that Giants system. So, I think so. And as for Yoshivas, we will get to him, I promise, in a minute. But Keon Coleman, over 2.5 receptions, does a great route runner, will keep this offense ahead of schedule, most importantly, should things go a bit awry for the Bills. But I don't think it will. That being said, it's a nice little bet to consider. Coming up next, though, Jaden Daniels. Let's talk about Jaden Daniels because a lot of people might not have a Commanders bet for tonight because a lot of people might not like a lot of Commanders bets in general. But Jaden Daniels, this one also feels kind of easy, over 25 plus rush yards. And at minus 115, I think that in order for this offense to have success tonight, their running game is going to have to be clicking immediately. I think about the Bengals' run defense. It's one of the most underrated in the league. And it's very good at going sideline to stop players. I love their edge rushers. Their linebackers are not necessarily the best, but they are very good off-ball linebackers. But Jaden Daniels, in many different ways, if there's one silver lining to his performance for these first 3 weeks, it's his improvisation. And we know that he has the wheels to get out in space and be effective for the Commanders. So if the Commanders are down a lot, or if they're trying to get back into the game, then Jaden Daniels, his legs will definitely be a factor. So that seems to be an easy bet in the Commanders-Bengals game if you're looking for a little nice Commanders bet. Then let's get to the man that was just mentioned, the man of the moment, Andre Yoshevas, the presumptive wide receiver 2 tonight, maybe because of the T. Higgins situation, but if he is, as Andre says, Bijan's getting outscored by second and third round running backs, I don't know what to think. Yeah, he's just been very disappointing this season. Yes, there are opportunities for him in this offense. Yes, there are touches, but they just haven't translated. Last night, I was very frustrated by the lack of breakaway ability that he was limited to in this game, because there were moments where Algier had running lanes that he utilized very well, and there were moments where Bijan kind of had the same running lanes, but was not to little effect. So I don't know what to think either about how the future of Bijan Robinson this season has going forward. But go back to Andre Yoshevas right now. As Andre said, he's just missing touchdowns. That's the thing, When you bring in someone like Kirk Cousins to run your offense, you're always asking a lot of different weapons to make themselves utilized. And it's very hard if you're the running back in the backfield in the situation when you have guys like Drake London, Darnell Mooney, who's been a big surprise, and Kyle Pitts, who all want to get in on the action. So it's kind of hard. But it is kind of frustrating, especially because Algier seems to be playing better than him. So it is kind of a weird situation where Bijan might not be as effective, even though he's getting the touches he desires in that offense. But like I said, I want to get to Andre Yoshevas. It's my ambitious bet of the night, over 40 plus receiving yards, at plus 205. It's asking a lot of the young man. His 2 catches, yes, there were touchdowns last week, but they only went for 7 yards. They were both in the red zone. But this game, look for him to be a nice little weapon. I think that, yes, he does kind of project to be more of a red zone threat for as long as they're asking him to, hold down the wide receiver 2-3 role. But I think at the end of the day, the bottom line is Joe Burrow wants to have a target for every situation. Whether it's in the red zone, whether it's in the open field, he always wants to have another target. And if it's just Chase, then I don't think the offense will be as effective. So look for him to target Andre Yoshevas a little bit more in this game. That being said, I think that in terms of both of these games, and the reason why they're very weird to bet on is that, for example, the Commanders-Bengals game is just one of those games where you have to really be confident in the matchup that you're looking at to say, okay, I want to bet on this game. Because even I'm a little bit skeptical about the Jaden Daniels bet, even though he's a fantastic rushing quarterback. I'm especially skeptical about the Andre Yoshevas one because there are just so many questions about the Bengals wide receiving core now. Whereas the Jags-Bills game, it seems pretty clear-cut, right? You know Josh Allen's probably going to have a big game. You know Trevor Lawrence should continue to struggle. You know that, I didn't even mention Khalil Shakir. I just want to mention this final bet here. Khalil Shakir, I predict, will have over 70 plus receiving yards and plus 295. Quickly becoming a wide receiver one. That's the reality of the situation. If a lot of you drafted Keon Coleman, it's not looking like he's going to be a receiver one in this system, unfortunately. But, like I said, it just seems very clear-cut with the Commanders-Bengals one could veer off in many different directions because we know we have exciting players on both sides of the football, but what with the lack of information about the status of what the Commanders could be and the whole situation on the Bengals in terms of all their kind of turmoil externally, then this game could be one of those games where you might want to sit out because you might be tempted to make a bet you wouldn't otherwise want to make, and then it's not going to hit for you in that regard. So, make of these games what you will. Take my predictions with a grain of salt. But let me know what you think in the comments because both of these games are very hard to bet. Andre, I like saying Jamar's going under. Very bold prediction. Could hit, I think. But you never know. But coming up next, we transition a little bit to the world of college football where I go over my college fantasy stars from this past week and a lot of interesting games going on in college football right now. So, I just want to touch on them a little bit. But we'll be right back after this short break to go to that transition.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Hope you enjoyed the first two segments because we're going to take a little bit of a break from the NFL for a little bit and transition to the world of college football. A lot of you guys have seemed to like these college football segments. I love college football myself, and I especially love the world of fantasy college football, as all these players are really stepping up in certain situations. A lot of big games, a lot of big conference games, a lot on the line for a lot of different teams. So, therefore, a lot of different fantasy stars that I could have picked this week. But I compiled a nice little list for you guys. So let me know what you think about this list in the comments after I'm done. But without further ado, let's jump into some of my college football fantasy stars of the week. Let's start off with one quarterback. And this was a guy who a lot of people were very low on after that first game against Georgia. This was a guy who had the weight of expectation on his shoulders, being a Clemson quarterback who, after generational talent, was there for them in the late to mid 2010s. And then DJ, that whole situation, and now him. A lot of pressure was put onto his shoulders to kind of lead a new renaissance, a new beginning for a team that seemed very stuck in his ways. And after the Georgia game, a lot of people were left wanting. But over the past couple of weeks, as he's gotten a little bit into ACC play, he's really been one of, if not the best quarterback over this 2-week stretch in all of college football. So I have to give my flowers to Cade Klubnik for really stepping up and being a quarterback who Clemson can rely upon again. Because at the start of the season, it certainly felt like Clemson was in for a rough season. But Cade Klubnik, kudos to him for turning it around. I hope he sustains it for the rest of the season because Clemson could be a sneaky ACC contender. It seems like one of the more wide open conferences in college football. So look for Clemson to stay in and around the ACC race, and we'll all be down to Cade Klubnik against NC State. Very important conference game. 16 of 24, 209 yards, 3 TDs, 33.4 fantasy points for Cade Klubnik. And I don't necessarily know if this is going to continue, but it is very telling, right? Because when you look at Clemson and you look at the way they build, they're heavily insistent on keeping players in their system and not cherry picking from other schools through the NIL and transfer portal. So Cade Klubnik was kind of forced to live with what he has. He's been doing it very effectively. Now, I don't know, in the ACC, which is one of the biggest kind of NIL profit-making conferences in terms of the schools they have and the lure that they bring, I'm not sure if this kind of identity will be able to stick for that long. But if, they can beat a team like NC State, even though they're kind of slowly falling down the ranks in the ACC, then it's a perfect litmus test for the future for Clemson. It's certainly brighter than some teams in the ACC, and who knows, maybe if, them and Florida State do leave the ACC, Cade Klubnik's play will eventually appeal to other conferences in terms of acquiring them for their conference, because that was the situation Clemson was in. If, they continued struggling, they would not have become appealing to other conferences should they have wanted to leave the ACC, which them and Florida State desired to do. So Cade Klubnik could be an X factor, not just in terms of the season for Clemson, but the future for Clemson and the horizons they want to reach. But let's go to a running back. And this guy, transfer, came into Ohio State, one of the most hyped transfers of his class. One guy who really could change the profile of this Ohio State team, and that is Quinshon Judkins. And I was really looking for him to have a big performance in these first couple of weeks, because I still think TreVeyon Henderson was, quote-unquote, the guy for them. But Quinshon Judkins had a very impressive performance against Marshall. 14 carries, 173 yards, 2 TDs, 31.7 fantasy points. So kudos to him. I think this partnership is going to be very dangerous down the stretch for Ohio State. Because looking at all the teams they play Michigan and Oregon, and those are perhaps the only two tough teams left on the schedule. So the fact that they have two physical running backs where they can kind of beat Michigan at their own game, and then going into Autzen Stadium on the road against Oregon down the road, it's going to be very pivotal and integral to have guys that you can trust not just in the receiving game, because they have one of if not the best receiving core in college football, but to have in the ground game. That's very vital, because I'm still kind of out a little bit on Will Howard. I'm a little skeptical of what he's going to look like against those big teams. So it's going to be very important for the ground game to kind of complement nicely what the receiving game is doing right now. So kudos to Quinshon Judkins for stepping up. And then another quarterback, again, from the Big Ten. This is a guy who also had a lot of questions coming into the season, but under new offensive coordinator Andy Kotelnicki, this offense really feels rejuvenated and ready to take on the Big Ten, potentially clinch a CFP spot, and that is Drew Aller. This young man, from where he was last season, where he was just kind of in damage control, not wanting to turn the ball over, not very ambitious in how far to the football on the field, really throwing the ball well to all levels of the field, incorporating so many different receivers, whether it be redshirt freshmen, experienced receivers. He's doing it all. 17 for 21, 309 yards, 3 TDs for this young man. So I just wanted to shout out Drew Aller for the progression he's made and the maturity he showed in leading a very hopeful Penn State team in Big Ten play. And they look very ready to take on the big boys in that conference. And another running back. This is a guy who had kind of big shoes to fill in this Missouri offense, replacing, Cody Schrader, a very legendary Missouri running back who will never be forgotten there. But Nate Noel really stepping up. And I really like the profile of the Missouri team. Yes, it was a very sketchy win over Vanderbilt, needing double overtime, needing a missed field goal to win that game. But Nate Noel might have been the reason that they pulled it out. And it just goes to show that on any given Saturday, you might need someone different to carry the load for you. 24 carries, 199 yards, 22.2 fantasy points. And on a day where perhaps the Cook-Burton connection for Missouri was not hitting, Nate Noel really stepped up. And that just goes to show how versatile they can be on the offensive side of the football. Eli Drinkwitz doing a great job keeping this offense on schedule. Maybe the defense is going to be tested because they don't have Chop Robinson anymore. But at the end of the day, a win is a win for Missouri, and Nate Noel was perhaps the biggest part of it in keeping them on schedule in a very loaded SEC is going to be integral going forward. Then another running back. Speaking of Big Ten running backs, let's talk about Khalil Mullings. This guy really shocked me in how he performed, not just this week, but this entirety of the start of the season, because I thought that Donovan Edwards was going to be the guy, right? Very kind of complimentary style running back where he is up for an explosive play in a game, but he keeps you on schedule. He's more physical, I guess. Whereas Khalil Mullings brings a lot of speed and explosiveness. That's what he brought in this game, but he also was very timely for this offense. This was a very vintage Michigan performance. They got back to what they did best. Having a quarterback who just protected the football, Alex Orji, and Khalil Mullings just did the rest. 17 carries, 159 yards, 2 TDs, including a game-winning touchdown, 28.3 fantasy points for him. So overall, if you are a Michigan fan, you should be very happy with this performance because it got back to what you guys know. It got back to having a dominant run game, being able to go down the field in a must-win situation and just pound the rock and just run after run after run, knowing that you're out physicaling your opponent. And kudos to USC, though, for playing a tough game, but in the big house, statement win early on in Big Ten play for Michigan. They should be very, very impressed with themselves. And the last guy I want to point out, another Big Ten guy, very Big Ten heavy kind of fantasy stars of the week list here. Omari Evans, I believe he's a young freshman out of Penn State. Big, big, big in terms of how he's stepping up for Penn State in the passing game, because that was what they were lacking. They were lacking a passing game, Penn State. They knew they had two of the best running backs in the country in Singleton and Allen, but they needed passing game. And this guy, Omari Evans, 4 receptions, 116 yards, 1 touchdown, 19.6 fantasy points. Just really impressive. Whether it be him, Harrison Wallace in the pass game for Penn State over these past couple of weeks, they really stepped up. And Andy Kotelnicki should get a lot of credit for helping this offense look more explosive. And I'm really excited to see what the Big Ten is going to look like, because out of all these players, a lot of Big Ten names in a lot of different places, a lot of players who feel like they can make an impact down the stretch in terms of competing for that CFP title. But overall, let me know what you think in the comments. Who was your fantasy college football star of the weekend? I have a lot. I could have had a lot more. There were definitely a lot of interesting games, but at the end of the day, these are the guys who I thought really impressed me. And it's telling that they're in the Big Ten, because that conference is going to be crazy in the coming weeks. But let me know what you think. Coming up after a quick break, though, we're going to be looking at the NFL fantasy stars of the week. The guys who really impressed me have continued to impress me over these past couple of weeks with their play. So we'll be right back after this short break to talk about that.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. We now switch back yet again to the NFL, going over my fantasy stars in the National Football League for this weekend. Overall, a lot of shocking games, really. A lot of games where, I thought that a couple of big surprises from the early parts of the season would kind of slow down, but no, they kept on going. A lot of new faces on this fantasy list. A lot of kind of unexpected surprises that I didn't expect to see week in, week out on this list as well. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right into it, but let me know what you think in the comments as I go along, because you might have a different opinion that I would love to hear. Let's start off at the quarterback position. This one will really shock a lot of people. Some of you may not even have started these guys at the start of the season, and it certainly was not on my bingo card going into the season to have these guys even be in the conversation as being quote-unquote fantasy stars. Let's start off perhaps the most impressive quarterback in the NFL right now. We got to give love to Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold, in that system, really is shining in the biggest moments. I don't know what Kevin O'Connell is doing with him, but it's working. And he looks very timely. 4 touchdowns, 181 yards, 23.24 fantasy points from Sam Darnold. And I think that he's just going to continue to grow into the season. I think that this Vikings team is legitimate. And as long as, Justin Jefferson stays healthy, as long as he's willing to distribute the wealth through all his weapons, he's a dangerous quarterback. All of his touchdown throws went to 4 different receivers, I believe. He had touchdowns to Justin Jefferson, Jalen Naylor, Johnny Munt was like their tight end 3 starting the season. So it just goes to show that Sam Darnold is the most comfortable he's ever been in an NFL offensive system. And if it continues to go, look out for the Minnesota Vikings. This is a team that nobody expected to go 3-0. Nobody expected Sam Darnold to play this well. And especially given the fact that he wasn't even supposed to start this season. The fact that, J.J. McCarthy was all lined up before his injury to start this season. Sam Darnold steps up to the plate, and he is ultimately hitting it out of the park. He could even look like an early MVP candidate, but that might be overstepping myself. But for what it's worth, he is one of my NFL fantasy stars of the week to start us off in the segment. And then how about, and I told you about this guy last week, Malik Willis. Potentially his final game as the full-time starter of the Green Bay Packers against his former team. He kind of made them regret giving him up. 13 of 19, 209 yards, 2 touchdowns, 73 rushing yards as well. This was a game, right, where Matt LaFleur said, I'm throwing caution to the wind. I'm going to let Malik Willis loose on his former team. And he played very consistently. I was amazed at what he was able to do. Yes, it wasn't a high volume of throws from him, but from what we see, he has been very good. And not for nothing, this may have earned him a backup gig somewhere else. But if Jordan Love is out longer than extended, then I think Packers fans will be quite happy with what they've seen out of Malik Willis. And like I said, Jordan Love should be back next week, but if somehow he's not, or for some reason he's not, then Malik Willis looks primed and ready to go against, ironically, the Vikings. So that would be a very interesting matchup. My 2 fantasy stars of the week in terms of quarterbacks going up against each other, potentially for the early division lead. With a 25.38 fantasy points from someone who a lot of people weren't even on the radar of. It wasn't, a known commodity as someone who could be, say, a solid backup or QB2. To have that kind of performance is really something to behold. So, Malik Willis, kudos to you. And with the time that you had with the Packers, hopefully, a team sees this and trusts him with either the backup role or maybe even a starting gig. If you're, say, the Titans or the Raiders, maybe going back to the Titans wouldn't be the best of situations, but they are kind of desperate, as we saw in that game. But at the end of the day, Malik Willis is just someone who has really silently impressed the NFL these past couple of weeks. Let's go to some more skill position type players. Some guys who really have stepped up in terms of what they mean to their offenses. I want to start off with Malik Neighbors, was mentioned during this show. And I just think he's going to become more and more valuable for the New York Giants. Yes, it's going to get to the point where Daniel Jones is kind of forcing the ball to him, and that may lead to the detriment of this offense. But he's good enough to at least make an impact on a lot of different games. And they have an interesting schedule coming up. They have the Cowboys. They go on the road to Seattle. That's going to be an interesting game. But The NFC East certainly doesn't necessarily feel like it's going to want to be won by anyone. This certainly feels like a division that will be up for grabs late in the season. And I'm not saying the Giants will win it outright. But I am saying that the Giants, because of Malik Neighbors and what he brings to the table, could be more competitive than we think. I'm not sure if it will translate to many wins on the field, but just know Malik Neighbors is now going to become more and more reliable to this team. And I think about what he means to the future of the Giants, right? If he is who we say he is, and he's going to continue to perform, that could mean that if Daniel Jones doesn't look good but still, is able to distribute the ball to him in a timely manner and get him a lot of yards, it's going to be interesting seeing the whole quarterback situation there, because we now know, right, that Malik Neighbors is quite honestly the best receiver Daniel Jones has had in his Giants career. But is he going to lead to the detriment in that outside of him, this offense really looks unimpressive? Because it's one thing to have that wide receiver that your franchise quarterback so desperately needs, but it's quite another when he's quite possibly not just your generational wide receiver, but a lifeline in general for your offense. So it's going to be interesting to see at the end of the year, because I fully expect Malik Neighbors to continue to grow and develop in this offense. It's going to be interesting to see how the whole Daniel Jones situation is figured out, because if one of these players in this whole situation is playing better than the other, then you might have to check that out. But for now, the Giants pick up a nice win against the Browns. Everything's a little bit eased in Giantsville, so for now, we press pause on the Giants and wait and see for them. And then another guy who really was the difference between a win and a loss, and who I said in these kind of situations would have to step up, Jonathan Taylor. 23 carries, 110 yards, 2 touchdowns, 26.5 fantasy points. Like I said, Jonathan Taylor is going to be very important to the rhythm of the Colts offense, and most importantly to Anthony Richardson's development. And yesterday, he really proved that he can really help Anthony Richardson out in the backfield, because Anthony Richardson really kind of looked lost yet again in this game. He made some impressive throws, and he made some throws that should have been completed and could have been completed by any other quarterback for that matter. So just the fact that Jonathan Taylor is rounding back into form, getting back into being the running back we know he can be, is going to be very important for the Colts moving forward in offense, because the defense looked pretty decent. Yes, it was against the Bears offense, and the Bears offense has not looked the best it can possibly be. But, if they can combine timely offense and complementary defense together, the Colts could be brewing something. It all depends on what Anthony Richardson can become, but just knowing they have Jonathan Taylor there should put them at ease for a little bit, because he is something to behold in that offense. Then how about, let's go to a tight end here. Let's go to another difference maker as well. All of these guys, in some way or other outside of potentially the quarterbacks that I discussed, all with a difference between their teams winning and losing. If you look at Malik Neighbors and Jonathan Taylor, you can definitely point to their performances as bright spots for their wins. This guy, definitely. Dallas Goedert. 10 catches, 170 yards, 27 fantasy points. And like I said, week in, week out, the tight end market is going to be the most volatile in all of fantasy football, right? Because you never know who's going to perform well. Well, Dallas Goedert certainly stepped up to the plate, had the big catch that really was the difference in this game, the 61-yarder to set them up for their touchdown. So kudos to Dallas Goedert for really stepping up. He's one of those tight ends who you kind of get lost in the mix about, because you have all these high-end tight ends that you really want to swing for the fences on, and you kind of forget about all the guys in the middle, like a Dallas Goedert, like, say, when he comes back, a TJ Hawkinson, who really can have big games week in, week out. And not for nothing, he's now going to become much more important. Yes, the Devontae Smith injury isn't as serious, but even when he comes back, Dallas Goedert's going to have a bigger role in this offense for as long as A.J. Brown is still going to be out. And the fact that him and Saquon really stepped up in that situation was impressive. And that's what's going to be needed for this Philadelphia Eagles offense. It kind of feels a little disjointed outside of them. But Dallas Goedert really setting the tone late in that game for the Eagles offense. And then, how about Jauan Jennings, man? Jauan Jennings, really impressive, really stepped up to the plate. Ultimately, it was somehow a losing effort. The Rams came back in this game. But Jauan Jennings proved that it's not just McCaffrey. It's not just Kittle. It's not just Samuel. I told you. Jauan Jennings is still a very important piece for this 49ers team, especially on the offensive side of the football. 11 catches, 175 yards, 3 TDs, 46.5 fantasy points for Jauan Jennings. Now, obviously, we don't know how long Jauan Jennings is going to be of importance to a fantasy squad, but for the time being, utilize this guy to the best of your abilities. If he's still on waivers, pick him up because he's going to be very desirable over these next couple of weeks as we get more updates about, the injuries to this 49ers squad. But it just goes to show that on any given Sunday, when your team is kind of reeling and you need someone to give you a pick-me-up, you have a guy like Jauan Jennings on your team. That just goes to show the depth of what the 49ers have built in their team. And last but not least, let's talk about Dak Prescott. Yes, it was kind of a garbage time comeback, but still an impressive performance. He showed a lot of moxie in this performance going into that Thursday night game against New York. 379 yards, 2 TDs, 29.86 fantasy points. Kind of really won me one of my fantasy games in my auto draft league, so I'm thankful to Dak for that. But ultimately, it was a very disappointing loss for Dallas. We don't know their future, but it just goes to show that Dak still has a lot of moxie at the QE position. He still hasn't given up, on Mike McCarthy and this offense. So look for Dak to be one of those quarterbacks who you either have as a QB2 in a deeper league, or you say, Dak, he will still perform pretty well for me in certain weeks. So I'm going to stick him out there once in a while to get a start. But let me know what you think in the comments about my NFL fantasy stars, because all these guys in some way were very timely in their play. All of them a lot to offer this week and a lot to think about going forward. But coming up next to conclude our show, we talk about some stardom sit-em situations for Monday Night Football. A lot of 2 different games to think about, a lot of players as well. So we'll be right back to finish the show right after this break with that segment. Hello everyone and welcome back to the last segment of the day here on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, and this is a little stardom sit-em segment to get you prepared for Monday Night Football. If you have a couple last minute players that you want to add to your team, this is the time to do it, and these are the guys who I think will have an impact on their respective games in both the Jags Bills and Commanders Bengals. Without further ado, let's start off with a guy in the Jags Bills game who a lot of people might be surprised I'm mentioning here, because this guy, at the start of the season, no one really knew who the wide receiver 1 would be for Buffalo, but this guy has really stepped up out of the slot, on the outside, wherever you want him aligned, to really be a fascinating presence for this Bills team. And if they decide to throw the football early and often in this game, this is going to be the guy to do it. So I'm going to say start Khalil Shakir tonight. Now, I know that a lot of you might be skeptical about this pick, but the fact of the matter is Khalil Shakir is playing like and looking like the wide receiver 1 here in Buffalo. And a couple of stats to support this claim that I'm making here, because I don't want to sound too silly. 25% first read target share he's receiving. That's a huge percentage of the targets that he's getting as the first read in this offense. So Josh Allen, when he is throwing the football, when he is stepping back to the pocket, not, rolling out, throwing screens, not looking to, make big plays. When he is dropping back, at the first read, he's looking to Khalil Shakir 25% of the time. That's the 4th highest team total in fantasy points as well, Khalil Shakir. Now, of course, it's behind, guys like Cook and Kincaid, who we know and expect to perform in this offense. But Khalil Shakir, in that wide receiver core, really could step up into a bigger role should opposing defenses wish to hone in on stopping the run here. Because I think James Cook will be effective for many games, but there will come a time where he's going to have to be forced to throw the football a little bit more, Josh Allen. And Khalil Shakir, from the small sample size we've seen of him playing in that slot role, is someone who I think can step in effectively. And so I'm not necessarily making a case to start him often, but I am making the case that in certain games, much like this matchup tonight, he could be of value. And I know I've talked about all the other weapons that Josh Allen has at his disposal, but I think Khalil Shakir could be the biggest X factor, not just in tonight's game, but throughout the entirety of the season. So start Khalil Shakir tonight, and I promise, and I promise, that it will pay dividends. The guy who should sit tonight, this one seems pretty obvious right now, because this guy lost a lot of kind of hype in this offense, especially now that he's kind of carrying the weight of the load, with Jahan Dotson now in Philly. Terry McLaurin really is kind of one of those wide receiver 1s where, he doesn't necessarily play like a wide receiver 1. He has his moments, but he's not necessarily someone who you can point to and say he can take over a game at any given time. And against the Bengals tonight, I really think his slow start to the season will continue. Only 8 catches to start the season for 39 yards for Terry McLaurin. And I just think that the Washington wide receiver room right now leaves a lot to be desired in terms of helping, Jaden Daniels and, Terry McLaurin in creating a relationship, because when you have one guy who you expect to be your wide receiver 1 and just a bunch of role-playing depth kind of guys, you're not going to have an effective passing game in terms of creating leverage for your number 1 wide receiver. I don't necessarily like Zaccheaus as a wide receiver 2. There's a lot of hope around De'Ami Brown, kind of as a vertical threat to stretch the field, but that's gone as well. And you don't have, like Jahan Dotson. He's a very good route runner in that regard. So there's a lot of questions surrounding this Washington wide receiver room with not a lot of answers. And I don't think that they'll find many answers tonight against Cincinnati, who, even though the strength of their defense is essentially their front 7, I think that against a rookie quarterback, you're not going to face too many, deep shots in this game. And watch for Washington to play a lot of catch-up in this game. Terry McLaurin for tonight is not a good play in terms of fantasy, and it kind of is maddening because I really had high hopes for him. But right now, it just feels very bleak for him in that Washington wide receiver room. Guy who should start, we talked about a little bit during the show, and Andre might disagree with me in this regard if he's still in the comment section. Jamar Chase. I think that this is the perfect game for Jamar Chase to really go off, because against Washington, it's an interconference game. There's not much importance to it. You are 0-2, but you just played the Chiefs very tough. Should have won that game, if you want my opinion. Now you're going up against a team where you feel like you can put your foot on the gas offensively and just win comfortably, get back on track in the season. I don't think, the contract situation with Jamar is going to hold a lot of weight anymore, because the Bengals now know what they are. And what they are is a team who can contend with the best in the AFC. And their schedule, it's going to get tougher down the stretch. But for now, when the game is in front of you, they have a couple big games, where they can get easy wins against Commanders, against the Panthers, where you expect them to win. So, Jamar Chase, he's going to leave all the tension of what happened in the offseason behind, and the Bengals are going to start thinking internally about what this team can be, because externally, yes, it was a mess. But right now, they're in an advantageous position to get 2 easy wins and go into the meat of their schedule, looking to be one of the beasts of the AFC. And Jamar Chase is going to be a huge part of that, especially, if T. Higgins is still, kind of coming back from injury and also from a crazy kind of contract situation. So Jamar Chase is going to be of importance. I could have put Yoshivas here because he's kind of a cult hero in my mind and your minds, I guess, as well. But Jamar Chase is simply the guy who's going to be the X factor going forward for Cincinnati. And the last player that I want to talk about is Christian Kirk. I've had a lot of qualms with Christian Kirk because the potential he really does have in this offense for, this Jaguar squad. But let me be clear about the Jags. This is a team, right, where you have a quarterback in Trevor Lawrence who you're wanting to improve. You invested a lot of money into. But around him, the infrastructure is not set up for him to succeed when you have a lot of guys in your wide receiver room predicated on speed and getting vertical. And you just lost perhaps your best route runner in your entire team, and Evan Engram, your tight end, to an injury as well. You don't know when he's coming back. So the reason why I'm so low on any Jacksonville wide receiver for fantasy purposes is because they don't offer anything to Trevor Lawrence by just, trying to use their speed to get past corners. A lot of what the Jaguars' deficiencies are in high intelligence route running, getting and scheming people open. And that's what's going to happen. Yes, you can also point to the deficiencies in the running game. Travis Etienne hasn't really looked himself to start the year. But this is a team, as Shep Easy Sweet Spot said, Jefferson played his entire rookie contract, and look what he got. So Jamar, stay healthy, and maybe you top your LSU bud by more than a penny. Well, I think that, the whole situation there in Cincy was kind of complicated by the T. Higgins situation as well. But Jamar Chase is going to get his money. I think that this whole situation has to be in the past for Cincinnati in order for them to prepare for the meat of their schedule. Like I said, they have 2 easy games coming up, and Jamar shouldn't necessarily worried about it. He's going to get paid, and I think he's going to get paid around, if not the same range as Justin Jefferson, maybe a little bit more. So I don't know why it had to be this way, because he had 2 years left on his contract and not just 1. So the whole situation was a little bit of a mess there. But right now, I feel like Jamar is ready to get past this current moment and prepare for the stretch run of this season. But back to the kind of bigger mess here in Jacksonville, because I think of Christian Kirk, I think of a guy who can utilize his speed to good effect. He's a decent route runner, but the problem is when you don't have diversity in your receivers or route trees, the offense stagnates. Because Brian Thomas Jr., yes, he's a wonderful deep threat. Love his verticality. And coming out of LSU, that was probably the biggest thing that we're looking at in terms of getting Trevor Lawrence a deep weapon, because Trevor Lawrence's deep ball is one of the more underrated ones in the league, according to stats. But any Jacksonville wide receiver right now should be feeling pretty hard done by because of the fact that they just don't fit together in the scheme. So Christian Kirk, and to top it all off, he only has a combined 4.9 points in his first 2 games. That should tell you everything. So make of this what you will, but I'm not holding my breath in terms of the excitability of this Jacksonville wide receiver room. It's kind of disappointing because it seemed to really entrust a guy like Brian Thomas Jr. to help them, but it's not the case. But let me know what you think in the comments. But that will just about do it for the show. Thank you all for tuning in yet again. This has been the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. I've been Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the show and the network. Also, keep on making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube to continue to contribute and interact with the show. Any questions, comments, or concerns are always accepted. Love your interaction thus far. We will be right back tomorrow at the same time as always, 3:30 p.m. Eastern, with another fantastic show. But because of that, we'll be right back tomorrow. Thank you all for tuning in.